Hello everyone, my name is TAMRYN Hamilton and I'd like to say thank you for joining for my master's presentation titled The Long-Term Reconstruction of Rainfall and Fire for the Kavango-East and Zambezi Regions of Namibia and the Impact of Past People on Fire Regimes. But before we can explore what's happened in the past, let's go over some of what is already known about savannas. Savannas have been recently defined as a system with a continuous C4 grassy understory and a discontinuous woody overstory. These ecosystems are described as variable and resilient and can have very different vegetation structures. The classic open savanna is typically dominated by C4 grasses with sparse woody cover, whilst more dense savannas can have an almost closed canopy. There are multiple factors that influence savanna structure. These can be broadly classified as climate, consumers, and vegetation, all three of which are strongly impacted by human activity. Fire has a major impact on savanna structure. Fire exclusion studies in South Africa have determined that frequent burning causes smaller, less intense fires and is characteristic of increased grassy cover. Long-term suppression, on the other hand, results in larger fires with greater intensity and the potential to impact woody vegetation. The graph on the right shows that fire has thresholds to which it switches on and off. When mean annual rainfall is too low, there's insufficient fuel accumulation to support fire, known as a load-limited savanna. While too much rainfall prevents effective drying, known as a moisture-limited savanna. Overall, savannas are complex ecosystems that are well studied in terms of modern research. But not as much is known about the longer timescales where vegetation responses occur. Gilson argues that our understanding of the thresholds defining savanna habitats is based on recent definitions following centuries of human manipulation. If past conditions approximate those expected for the future, could savanna responses be similar? However, the lack of agreement on the exact controls for savanna structure and function make predicting the subsequent response of savannas to changing climate uncertain. Many long-term studies are at temporal scales where they're able to identify ecosystem change or habitat loss, but not at a fine enough resolution to inform modern decision-making. In contrast, instrumental records are high resolution, but in Southern Africa are often too short to inform about environmental change, with few records exceeding 50 years. For my master's, the aim was to investigate the relationship between historic rainfall and fire. I used the Linyanti tree core, developed from my honors project in 2016, and generated a new fire record from sedimentary charcoal analysis of the Mukolo sediment core. The Kavango-Zambezi region is highlighted on the map in dark green and occurs on the boundary between savanna and woodland vegetation types within southern Africa. The first step was to generate a new chronology for the Linyanti rainfall record. A total of 12 radiocarbon dates were generated from the 1.5 meter long tree core. Those radiocarbon dates were interpolated using Bayesian statistics, a package called Bacon on RStudio, which ran 100,000 iterations to determine the most probable chronology. This new chronology was then applied to the isotope record shown below. To validate the rainfall record, there aren't any nearby instrumental records dating back further than 1950, but there are other environmental proxies from the southern hemisphere. The top image shows an overlay of the Linyanti rainfall record on coral sea surface temperatures reconstructed from the coast of Madagascar. And although these records are thousands of kilometers away from each other, they do show undeniable similarity. The graphs on the right show comparisons of the Linyanti rainfall record against regionally averaged instrumental rainfall records from Nicholson and Entakabi. These records don't match up as nicely because the Linyanti tree is located on the boundary between the two clusters. But it's important to note that they do show coinciding spikes in response to rainfall variation. The Mukolo sediment core was radiocarbon dated with a total of 18 dates from the 84 centimeter length core. 10 samples were from bulk sediments and 8 were from sampled charcoal pieces. The radiocarbon dates of the two components coincided for the top 20 centimeters and the very bottom of the core, but deviated in between with a minimum difference of 300 years. The age difference in data material was attributed to the inbuilt age of charcoal, also known as the old wood problem, where wood from an old tree, for example, would generate older radiocarbon ages. Hence, the charcoal radiocarbon dates were excluded from age depth modeling. The model shown here excludes a radiocarbon date for being too young at 15 centimeters, likely due to modern root intrusions, and too old at 20 centimeters, possibly dominated by old wood charcoal. You can see a coinciding charcoal and bulk sediment dates in the graph on the left. This model estimates an almost linear sediment accumulation that averages at about 7.5 years per centimeter. During sediment analysis and preparation, the charcoal is separated into two size classes, macroscopic and microscopic charcoal. The macroscopic charcoal is larger pieces that are sieved out of the sediment and shown on the left. Due to the larger size of these particles, these components are assumed to represent local fire activity. However, there is some disagreement within literature and few African studies to compare against. The closest study area was in Kruger National Park and identified a source area of approximately 5 kilometers. Microscopic charcoal is much smaller particles. The image on the right shows a slide cover slip covered in charcoal. These particles are theoretically small enough to be carried greater distances and are associated with regional source areas. In the case of the same Kruger National Park study, it was attributed to a maximum distance of 15 kilometers. But that study excluded intense fires, where stronger uplift could move particles even further. However, when we're comparing environmental proxies, it's not an easy task. As scientists, we know that analyses incur error, and when comparing between two datasets, each with their own associated errors, it can yield poor measures of relationships we know exist. Kind of like comparing apples and oranges, they're both fruit and their growth responds to rainfall, but they grow differently and have different characteristics. For that reason, the analysis of rainfall and fire records has been done in time-frequency space and at a multiple timescales to counteract any issues related to the chronology. To start off, I looked at trends within each record. These graphs show strong trends in red with the timescale increasing along the y-axis. The Linyanti rainfall record showed multiple short-term trends prior to 1700, and thereafter a persisting trend at a longer timescale. The fire records were separated into local and regional signals, which are very clearly different and shown on the right. Local fire dominated before 1750, while regional fire dominated thereafter. These images represent an overlay of the rainfall and fire records. The timescale of comparison increases along the y-axis, and the rainfall record is shown below as a black line. The comparison of rainfall and local fire is shown on the left, where long-term trends are outlined in white as being statistically significant at 95% confidence, suggesting that local fire is driven by long-term rainfall dynamics. On the right, you can see the comparison of rainfall and regional fire, where significant trends are limited to the most modern part of the record. To interpret these records, we have to take a step back and think about what they mean in terms of the local human context. The records start with a high charcoal count and a decline in rainfall that coincides with drought conditions associated with the collapse of Mapungubwe. It suggests a load-limited system. From 1350 onward is where the record is dominated by local fires and coincides with the spread of agriculture and pastoralism in southern Africa. This region of the record also coincides with the old wood charcoal samples, suggesting that fires were intense enough to burn established trees. The rainfall decline around 1650 is diagnostic of the Little Ice Age. From 1700 to 1800, cooler temperatures are observed at Makabaman's Gat caves, and the combination of cooler and drier conditions suggests a transition to a load-limited system. From 1830 to 1900, there was a mass influx of Bantu-speaking people from the south, fleeing Shaka's reign, resulting in displacement and conflict that coincides with the spike in microscopic charcoal. The increase in regional scale fire and decline in rainfall suggest a moisture limit system. In the late 1980s, German colonial government inhabits the region, and the legislation prohibits fire with a noticeable decline in charcoal concentrations. But what does this mean for understanding modern savannas? This study demonstrates that savanna systems have shifted between load and moisture-limited systems in the past, with implications for future climate change. The Kavango-Zambezi region has been host to variable rainfall and fire for at least the past 600 years and provides valuable historic records for a data deficit region of southern Africa. The Little Ice Age seems to have been a trigger for a large-scale system shift, which has persisted for at least 200 years. The recent increase in regional fire activity could be linked to humans, but cannot be isolated without further evidence. Thank you very much for listening in on my talk. I'd like to say thank you to the valuable contributions from various people at WITS, at Timber Labs, the UCT Plant Conservation Unit, and SAON. Any questions?